International. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere Akine, a substantial miscarriage of justice. Almost 30 years after he was sent to prison, the Supreme Court posthumously quashes Peter Ellis's child sex abuse convictions that centred around a Canterbury creche. We'll have extensive coverage of the ruling and the case that has divided a community for decades. An Auckland pizza store owner is ordered to pay almost $100,000 to a migrant worker exploited for 8 years. US President Joe Biden pardons thousands with marijuana convictions. And who ate all the pies while the American Women's Rugby World Cup team gave it their best shot? Don't forget, you can catch us live on Sky Channel 83, Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Ngā mihi o te ahi ahi. Good afternoon. I'm Evie Ashton. The lawyer for Peter Ellis says his exoneration by the country's highest court is a fantastic feeling for his family. The Supreme Court today quashed Mr Ellis's 1993 convictions for child sex offences, finding a significant miscarriage of justice occurred. Peter Ellis died of cancer in 2019, but the court allowed the appeal to go ahead because of the significant public interest. His lawyer, Rob Harrison, says Mr Ellis never gave up trying to clear his name.
Look, he was an indomitable spirit, really, and despite being charged with this, despite being convicted of this, despite having to live with this for the best part of 30 years, he didn't give up and he didn't back down from who he is or who he was, and he fought.
Rob Harrison says the family hasn't considered whether to seek compensation. Meanwhile, the parents of some of Peter Ellis's accusers say they're shocked and saddened his convictions were overturned. In a statement, they said their children suffered terrible abuse 3 decades ago and live with the effects today. They say the children weren't allowed a voice in the Supreme Court's process. The statement says the children, now adults, know what happened to them. An anti-poverty campaigner says the latest child poverty report is shocking, but doesn't come as a surprise. While the report shows a decline in child poverty rates in spite of COVID, rates still remain high among Māori and Pasifika children and disabled whānau. Auckland Action Against Poverty co-chair Agnes Mangele says there's still much more the government can do.
Why haven't they removed all sanctions from benefits? Why haven't they raised the benefit levels to a livable income? Why they are still not doing a high trust model for beneficiaries, and also universal services? Why haven't they looked into that yet? Because that's what we need.
The report draws from the 2020-2021 Household Economic Survey and doesn't include data from this year. About 100 people turned up to a lunchtime community rally in Gisborne today, searching for solutions after a spate of gang shootings. There have been 3 shootings in as many days this week, and 3 people were injured in a shooting last week. Rally organiser Tuta Ngarimu says the local mayor, Riet Stoltz, spoke along with whānau from across the city. There was anger about the response time from police and the actions of government agencies and the council. Police say they need to work with partners and the community to prevent this type of crime. The Green Party says moves towards decriminalising cannabis in the United States are a wake-up call for New Zealand. US President Joe Biden has pardoned thousands of Americans convicted of cannabis possession and urged state governors to follow suit. The Greens drug reform spokesperson Chloe Schwarbrick says Labour must also follow suit, given even the birthplace of the war on drugs has admitted failure.
It's a massive wake-up call to New Zealand, and hopefully it's a massive wake-up call to Cabinet and to our Prime Minister, who only a few years ago was in front of the United Nations stating that Aotearoa New Zealand had a health-based approach to drugs, because fundamentally that's untrue.
In response, the Health Minister Andrew Little says the government has respected the 2020 referendum on cannabis legalisation. And a missing tramper in Wellington has been rescued after making a help sign out of toilet paper. He went missing after leaving for a 5-day tramp on the 28th of September. Search and rescue found the 55-year-old tramper in Tararua Forest Park today. He was trapped in a hut by this week's bad weather without a rescue beacon. The man tried to spell out the word help with toilet paper but ran out before he could finish. However, the rescue helicopter still saw the signal. In sport, the Black Ferns will play their first match of the Rugby World Cup in front of a sellout crowd at Eden Park. Organisers have confirmed there are no tickets left for tomorrow's opening match day in Auckland. It will be the first time Eden Park, which has a capacity of 47,000, is sold out for a standalone women's sports event. The crowd will also more than double the largest attendance for a standalone women's sports event in New Zealand. Injured Breakers basketball side captain Tom Abercrombie says it's important they reconnect with fans as they get set to play their first home game in 489 days. After losing their opening game this season, the Australian NBL team play the Tasmania Jack Jumpers in Auckland tonight. Abercrombie says they're conscious of winning the fans back.
It's been a long time since they've been able to see us and connect with us as a team, and we've got to build that relationship back up with them and show that real, Kiwi toughness I think that they can relate to, and hopefully they like what they see and they come out and support us. We're excited to play in front of them again.
And White Ferns captain Sophie Devine says she's pleased after completing their tour of the West Indies with a 5-wicket victory in the 5th T20 at Antigua. The White Ferns reached their target of 102 on the last ball in the match, clinching a 4-1 series win. And Pakistan have set Bangladesh a target of 168 to win the opening match of the men's T20 Tri-Series in Christchurch. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, Hannah Gadsby, who's shown Nanette, was said to have transformed stand-up comedy. Nick Ascroft on poetry and Scrabble. Dorian Llewellyn on how to be a saint. And Richie Poulton, director of the Dunedin study, on his own life. Ko Kim Hillaho. Join me tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
This is RNZ National, Te Reo Irurangi o Aotearoa, on air on rnz.co.nz and on your mobile. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. For Northland and Auckland, partly cloudy, a few showers possible in the east later tomorrow. From Waikato to Kapiti Coast, including Coromandel Bay of Plenty and the central high country, fine. Morning frosts tomorrow, some showers possible about the ranges tomorrow afternoon. From Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Wellington, partly cloudy, showers clearing this evening or overnight, becoming fine early tomorrow. Bulla, Nelson and Marlborough, mainly fine, but the chance of a shower about the ranges this afternoon. Areas of cloud in the north tomorrow morning, then in Bulla later. Westland and Fiordland, fine today, showers developing tomorrow. For Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine apart from showers about Banks Peninsula until this evening, morning frosts tomorrow. And for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, a few showers clearing this evening. The time is 7 minutes past 5. I'll have an update on headlines and traffic at 20 past 5.
Thanks, Evie. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. He didn't live to hear it, but today Peter Ellis had his convictions for child sex abuse quashed by the Supreme Court after it found a significant miscarriage of justice. The Christchurch creche worker was found guilty of the sex offences in 1993 and in one of the country's most debated and divisive cases. Today's verdict marks the end of a 30-year battle by Ellis to clear his name, a decision that came 3 years after his death from cancer. But the parents of children of the Christchurch Civic Creche say they're shocked and saddened by the decision. Jamie Tahana reports.
It's been a verdict 30 years coming, delivered this afternoon by Chief Justice Dame Helen Wynne-Kelman from the bench of the Supreme Court.
The applications to produce further evidence are granted. The appeal is allowed. The convictions of the appellant are quashed.
Peter Ellis was a worker at the Christchurch Civic Creche, convicted of child sex offences in 1993 and serving 7 years in prison. He always maintained his innocence, twice going to the Court of Appeal and seeking royal prerogatives of mercy, but denied each time. Mr. Ellis lodged a last-ditch appeal to the Supreme Court in 2019, but he died of cancer before any hearing could be held. But in a legal first, the Supreme Court ruled the appeal could continue despite his death. Justice Glazebrook explained the reasons.
The public interest factors in this case mean that it is in the interests of justice to allow the appeal to proceed. In their view, the grounds of appeal are strong and raise systemic issues.
And today, the country's highest court found a substantial miscarriage of justice, the result of unbalanced or inadmissible expert evidence given in the 1993 trial. The justices pointed to faulty evidence given by specialist psychiatrist Peter Ellis and contamination of children's accounts by parental questioning. Chief Justice Wyn Kalman.
Given the extent of the inadmissible material, the significance of Dr. Ellis's departure from appropriate standards, and the impact of the evidence on the trial, the Section 23G evidence may well have affected the verdicts.
Outside court, tears from friends and siblings of Peter Ellis at the end of a decades-long fight. His lawyer, Rob Harrison, says Ellis never gave up on trying to clear his name.
Look, he was an indomitable spirit, really, and despite being charged with this, despite being convicted of this, despite having to live with this for the best part of 30 years, he didn't give up and he didn't back down from who he is or who he was, and he fought.
His brother, Mark Ellis, says Peter deserved to be there to hear the verdict.
Wish my brother was here, because it was really what he deserved. It's not for us to hear so much. Him and Mum, who were the staunch party in the whole thing, and always stood strong.
And a lifelong friend, Barry Doyle, teared up at the news, calling it a wonderful, hard-fought move.
The whole country has waited for the first sensible verdict that this case is known. And it's at the highest level, and we're all grateful, all grateful. It's been a long and pretty murderous journey, and it's sad that Peter's mother has died about a month ago.
But the parents of some of the children who accused Mr. Ellis of abuse in the 90s say they're shocked and saddened by the court's decision. In a statement, they said the children did suffer terrible abuse and live with the effects 3 decades on. They say the children know what happened to them and they were not allowed a voice in the Supreme Court process. It's an acknowledgement made today by the Chief Justice, Dame Helen Wyn Kalman.
This court's judgment is not to be read as a criticism of the parents, the complainants, or those involved in the investigation and trial. Our focus in this appeal was solely on conducting a careful analysis to evaluate whether a miscarriage of justice had occurred.
But now the legal chapter of the Peter Ellis story is closed. The country's highest court has had its say. Mr. Ellis's family say they have not considered whether they'll ask for compensation.
And Nigel Hampton, KC, represented Peter Ellis at his first appeal and kept in contact with him up until his death, and he joins us now. Kia ora, Nigel. This must be a pretty bittersweet moment, this judgment.
Well, it is. I mean, I don't consider it that way personally, but it certainly is in relation to Peter and his family, bittersweet for them, and an acknowledgement to Peter. He was utterly composed in relation to this in his dying days. He remained composed. He went to his death saying that even though he would not know the ultimate outcome, he knew inside himself where the truth lay.
So there were multiple appeals in this case. Governor-General involved, a ministerial inquiry, a request for a prerogative of mercy, all the way to the top court in the land. I mean, how could the legal system have got it so wrong? These are supposed to be fail-safes, aren't they?
Well, it's a human system. Human frailty exists in whatever system you like to think about, Lisa. One of the good things to come out of Peter's case, not directly but indirectly, the creation for the last 2 and a bit years of a Criminal Cases Review Commission, which looks at miscarriages of justice and would hopefully have been able to correct the Peter Ellis case long before. If it had been in existence, would have corrected it long before we had spent 30 years waiting for it to happen.
So what have you learnt from today's judgment? What have we learnt?
What have we learnt? A great care must be taken by prosecutions and by courts in allowing, particularly in jury trials, expert evidence. It is too easy for expert opinion evidence to overspill the bounds of known science, to overstep or overstretch and go beyond what should be allowed. And that's what has been found to have happened here. And B, as well as overstretching the bounds of the known science, here an expert who is supposed to be objective and helping the court is seen to have been involved at various stages before the trial itself, before the arrests even, involved in the interviewing of children, of looking at those interviews, of recognising contamination, but cross-contamination, but taking steps, as it were, to cover that over. And in fact, in a letter of August of 1992, pointing out those difficulties, but failing to be disclosed to the defence. So
there weren't proper boundaries, Nigel, around the duties of this expert witness, who was in fact involved, as you say, in many facets of the case.
Yeah.
Okay. What about the evidence of children? Can we ever rely on the memories of young children to convict someone? Should we?
We can, but not in the sort of circumstances that occurred here. It's got to be extraordinarily carefully handled. It can't be subject to the sort of prolonged and continual questioning that these children were subjected to. The number of interviews they underwent of themselves would have anchored material in their memories that which was not necessarily true or accurate material. So contamination comes from many sources, and came from many sources here in terms of parental influence, of continual questioning, of children talking about these things between themselves even.
Now, I ask this, Nigel, because it's an incredibly complicated field, right? And in this particular case, I think there were more than 100 kids interviewed. About 20 of them claimed some kind of abuse. And aside from some of the more fantastical allegations, there were some consistent claims running through the statement. So, is it really possible that many children, all of their evidence could be contaminated?
If you went through, as the Supreme Court did on this occasion, if you went through the history and the history leading up to the police involvement, then the police involvement and the interviewing that took place, the multiple interviews and the attitudes of parents in relation to these matters, and the fantastical nature that developed in terms of the content of the interviews, you would say that there was not, in any respect, the degree of reliability that would be needed to found a criminal prosecution.
The nuance matters in this case, Nigel, so this is an important question. Does this mean, this ruling, that Peter Ellis is innocent, or does it mean that he just didn't get a fair trial?
It is nuanced, but the bottom line is that there's been a substantial miscarriage in relation to the evidence, in relation to contamination, and in relation to some aspects of fairness of trial. It means that those convictions are set aside, but there's no resounding claim of Peter being able to walk from the court, an innocent man, if he could walk from the court, because that's not what the system is. The system is looking at whether there was a fair trial, and has concluded that this was not a fair trial.
Okay, and the other thing at issue here then is, were these children abused at all?
Well, again, that's a nuanced and multi-level question.
Indeed.
I would say, from my looking at and reading of the interviews and of how those developed and the content of those interviews, I would say not. But on a second level, how this was handled and the processes through which these children have been put over many a year, that is in itself an abuse of those children.
Really appreciate your time this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. That is Nigel Hampton, KC, there, speaking about the Ellis case. Now, later in the program, we'll hear from the aunt of one of the first complainants in the Peter Ellis sex abuse case and from the prison chaplain who became a lifelong friend after meeting Peter Ellis at Paparoa Prison. That's coming up later in the program. It is almost 20 minutes past 5. Kia mau tunu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. It is a significant ruling judgment from the Supreme Court today, quashing the convictions of Peter Ellis, those sex abuse convictions, after, well, a case that's run about 30 years and has been incredibly divisive. Let us know your thoughts. Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at checkpointrnz, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Now, Evie is standing very by with the headlines. Anea Evie, mina pita pita kōrero.
The lawyer for Peter Ellis says his exoneration by the country's highest court is a fantastic feeling for his family. The Supreme Court today quashed Mr Ellis's 1993 convictions for child sex offences, finding a significant miscarriage of justice occurred. But the parents of some of Mr Ellis's accusers say they're shocked and saddened by the decision. In a statement, they said their children suffered terrible abuse 3 decades ago and live with the effects today. An anti-poverty campaigner says the latest child poverty report is shocking but doesn't come as a surprise. While the report shows a decline in child poverty rates in spite of COVID, rates still remain high among Māori and Pasifika children and disabled whānau. The Green Party says moves towards decriminalising cannabis in the United States are a wake-up call for New Zealand. US President Joe Biden has pardoned thousands of Americans convicted of cannabis possession. Meanwhile, the US media are reporting that the FBI has gathered enough evidence to charge Hunter Biden, the president's son, with tax and gun-related crimes. And a forest fire has damaged the enigmatic stoned carved statues on Rapa Nui, Easter Island. Some of the charring is said to be irreparable. It's not yet known how many of the moai were affected by the blaze, which broke out on Monday. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, all the main routes seem to be moving normally for this hour. No crashes or delays, possibly helped along by a mainly fine day across the country. It's been beautifully sunny where we are. Our next news headlines and traffic is at 5:40.
Thank you, Evie. Well, it's official. The Black Ferns will play their first match of the Rugby World Cup in front of a sellout crowd at Eden Park. This afternoon, organisers confirmed there are no tickets left for tomorrow's opening match day in Auckland. Here with more is sports reporter Clay Wilson. Well, Clay, we've been tracking towards this all week, but you called it, so it's pretty big to confirm. Packed house, eh?
Yeah, we were pretty close when we spoke about it yesterday, and we've got there today, and significant in several ways, really. It's going to be the biggest crowd for a standalone women's sports event easily. I think it's more than double the biggest crowd we've had here for a women's sports event in New Zealand. First time Eden Park's been sold out for a women's sports event, and it's the biggest crowd for any match day in history of this tournament. So a lot of milestones there, and if you think about for the players as well, what a big moment this is for them to be able to play, especially the Black Ferns players, to be able to play in front of a huge crowd of 45,000. Kendra Cox said yesterday, she mentioned that she'd never played in front of a crowd even close to this, and she's played over 60 tests for New Zealand since 2007.
Oh, I hope it's not off-putting, Clay.
Well,
because
that's the other side of it, isn't it? That they're going to have to deal with that, with the moment, the emotion, the pressure that comes with that. But I think they've wrapped their heads around it. They've had a while to get used to the idea, and pretty special for them. And hats off to the organisers as well for making this accessible. I mean, obviously it's popular, people want to go along, but they've kept ticket prices down, and that's clearly got people in the door and sold it out. And I think it's special, it's important, especially for this opening day of the tournament.
I'm really concerned about pie supplies in the city as well. And we'll have more on that later about high consumption from some of the teams. I didn't know that,
but I'm concerned about that now as well.
Yeah, exactly. Get one while you can. And let's move on to the Breakers. Like, they've had a heck of a couple of years, right? This is the basketball team. Mm-hmm. But they're finally back in action here in New Zealand tonight. And please, no extra time this week, eh?
Yeah, that was a hectic start last week, wasn't it? I mean, we've been talking less and less about COVID impact on sport. So stories like this now seem a bit of a rarity. But 489 days it's been since the Breakers last played here in New Zealand. And they've really done it tough, haven't they? The last 2 seasons essentially based there in Australia, living out of a suitcase from hotel room to hotel room. They, of course, had COVID outbreaks in the team, dealing with everything that comes with that, being away from family, friends. So for them to come home is really great, because it did take a toll on their results as well, not just their mental health and that kind of thing. They only had 5 wins last season. So, and you think about the non-New Zealand-based players in the team, some of them signed for the team 2.5 seasons ago, have never actually been here to New Zealand.
Yeah,
so
never lived here.
It's a big moment for them down there at Spark Arena tonight. So a couple of really great occasions tonight, and then also again tomorrow with the rugby.
Yeah, well, it was a heartstopper last week at my house anyway. Extra time leading up to the news bulletin. Oh, what to watch anyway. So it's a pretty exciting weekend. Thank you, Clay. That's Clay Wilson with Sports News. Now, the latest child poverty report shows overall child poverty is on the decline in spite of COVID. But those on the front line say there's much more to do to plug the gaps. Here's political reporter Giles Dexter.
The government's contrasting the child poverty report favourably with the GFC, which saw child poverty rates spike. There are 145,000 fewer children in hardship than 2011. Hardship rates for Māori and Pacifica have also dropped. Social Development Minister Carmel Sepuloni says the government's making progress.
Clearly there's still more work to do, and we're absolutely focused on lifting children out of poverty. But despite the challenges that we've been hit with, including the pandemic, we've certainly made traction.
But the sobering facts remain. 1 in 10 children are growing up in material hardship. In single-parent households, it's nearly 1 in 3. More than twice as likely for Māori, nearly 3 times for Pacifica, and most of those who experience severe hardship are likely to remain there for some time. Auckland Action Against Poverty co-chair Agnes Mangale says the report is shocking but also not surprising.
A lot of people think that the parents are to blame because they don't want to do this and that. But with how society is at the moment and with how the system is at the moment, how can they expect people to be able to survive with these barriers and these things that are sort of stopping them from being able to grow and thrive?
Because it draws from 2020 to 21 data, the report doesn't include the ongoing impact of COVID and the cost of living crisis or the government's mitigation efforts. And the data is only from people living in private dwellings, meaning emergency housing isn't included. Professor Mike O'Brien from the Child Poverty Action Group says much will have been missed.
There's some pretty good solid evidence that if you look at what's happening in food banks, if you look at what's happening in terms of the whole range of supports that are developing for families outside of the benefit system, which reflect the sort of pressures that families are under.
Brian Perry's report labels the claim paid employment is the best way out of poverty as naive and misleading. 76% of families in poverty are also in employment. Green MP Jan Logie says the government should overhaul working for families so there's support regardless of someone's ability to be in paid work.
There are children who need more support than others. There are parents who are actually their health or their mental health will be negatively impacted by parenting and working longer hours. And we need them to make those assessments rather than blunt government policies or narratives.
But Carmel Sepuloni says there's no one issue to fix the most.
There's a range of social challenges that we face that we need to continue to work on simultaneously. If there was only one issue, then potentially there'd be a silver bullet to resolving the issue of child poverty in Aotearoa, and there isn't.
The Minister for Child Poverty Reduction was unavailable for interviews. That minister's name, Jacinda Ardern.
And that was Giles Dexter reporting 28 minutes after 5. Kia amo tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. And it's time for the business news. Ko taku hoa in INA, ko Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas joins us live in the studio. Let's start off with retirement villages, the wranglings over contract. What is the latest?
Yeah, this is this long-running tension between retirement village residents and the villages themselves over the contracts that govern the industry. Those contracts, just for people who aren't aware, they're called occupational occupational rights agreements. Essentially, if you are moving into a retirement village, you buy one of these ORAs, and that gives you the license to occupy a unit. Now, the consumer groups, the Retirement Commissioner have long been calling for a review of these contracts, saying that they actually lead to some undesirable outcomes for residents. And the Retirement Villages, the Retirement Village Residents Association has filed a complaint with the Commerce Commission, highlighting what they say are 5 unfair clauses that they want to be reviewed because they think they are in breach of the Fair Trading Act. And these particular clauses, they relate to exit payment dates, fees being charged after someone has left a village, and also who is responsible for repairs. And look, they're all quite complex, but to focus in on one of them, which is perhaps one of the biggest bones of contention, it's around exit payments. Because when you pay your money up front to move into a village, when you leave, you get that money returned to you, less a management fee. Side note there, retirement village residents, they would like for capital gains to be shared, but they are not.
So they're working on the price they originally paid. So they could be there for, 10, 15, 20 years, and the unit could be worth more, but that's not factored into it.
No, you get the money back, you paid less a management fee, but that money is paid back to you once the unit has been refurbished and then it has been resold. And we've heard some horror stories from the consumer groups about people having to wait months on end for that capital to be returned. They say it essentially feels like you're giving a loan to these companies, and they actually want that money to be returned back within 28 days. Now, that is far removed from what the villagers are willing to accept. They recently made some voluntary reforms saying that if money isn't returned back within 9 months, then villagers will pay interest on that money. They say to try and return money back within 28 days is just unfeasible because it creates sort of a liquidity problem for the villagers themselves. That means when you pay that money, they'd have to keep that money on their balance sheet. They wouldn't be able to use it to essentially build more villages because they have to be able to pay it out quickly to you when you move out or you pass away. You pay it to the estate. And they say for the most part, most capital is returned within 4 months, 75% of the time it's returned within 6 months, and 90% of the time it's returned within 9 months. So they feel like, they said when I spoke to them today that they were baffled and puzzled that the Retirement Village Residents Association has gone to the Commerce Commission over this. To me, it just speaks to some long-running tensions. This is clearly not the last we're going to hear from this. It'll be really interesting to see what the Commerce Commission has to say, whether they will investigate it or they'll throw it out.
Okay, Nicholas, what's happening with gold?
Well, gold is often regarded as a defensive asset, a safe haven in times of crisis and uncertainty. There's plenty of that going on at the moment, but gold has not been living up to its reputation. It hit a high earlier this year of just over $2,000 an ounce. That was following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But since then, prices have dived. It's down about 17% of the year to just over $1,700 an ounce. And much of that has been because of the US Federal Reserve. The gold is just another asset class that's been caught in the crossfire of a hawkish central bank, and the US Federal Reserve, perhaps the most important central bank in the world. So as interest rates in the US has risen, the investment yields available in the US have become a lot more attractive to investors. That's why you've seen investors selling out of the British pound, selling out of the New Zealand dollar, and rushing to the US. It's a much more attractive currency in that regard, and gold is no different, because think about it like this. If you are a New Zealand investor, you want to buy gold, gold is traded in US dollars. So when you go to buy it, the value of your currency is a lot weaker. So that's one of the factors that's really working against gold. And I think what this underscores really is that for investors at the moment right now, there's nowhere to hide. It's very hard to find a good return. So, people are really down on their luck, and you've got to be quite... really put the time and hopefully find something for yourself in the market at the moment.
Okay, Nicholas, make like an Olympic sprinter and take us around the market.
Yes, so the NZX down 21 points today to 11,104. The dollar, just mentioned it before, trading at 56.6 US cents, 88.3 Australian, 50.6 pence, and gold trading at $1,710 an ounce.
Thanks, Nicholas. Ka kite. And Nicholas Poynton there with Business News. And returning to our earlier story, the aunt of one of the first complainants in the Peter Ellis Ellis sex abuse case, accepts the legal process was flawed, but believes the former teacher is still guilty. The child in her family was interviewed by police, but was not one of the children Ellis was found guilty of abusing. Today, the Supreme Court quashed Peter Ellis's child abuse convictions for two main reasons: flawed evidence from an expert witness, and the jury was not properly informed about the significant risk of evidence from the children being contaminated, including from by the parents. I asked the aunt how her family and others were dealing with the court ruling.
It's mixed. We're kind of defeated in one respect. In another way, look, all of us knew how difficult it is, even with adult witnesses in those kind of thresholds in sexual offending trials, to get a guilty conviction. So they were always very high hurdles, legal threshold hurdles. We've always known, whatever the decision is, what happened, and that is that children were hurt and harmed, and this doesn't change that. I think it's pretty important for us to get across that the miscarriage of justice reported relates to the fairness of the trial procedure, which is intricate, and related to the skill of probably counsel on both sides and expert witnesses at the time. None of that's got anything to do with the evidence that the children gave, which was upheld by juries and courts and judges. So I guess parents and survivors are just living with their own realities, really. That's where we're at. I've got a few reactions come in, and I guess it's up and down through the day.
Do you mean from other families you've been speaking with who are involved in the case?
Yeah, I have. Other families, I've had some reactions from court families whose convictions have now been overcome. They said that, a legal decision just leaves out so much the emotion and years of helping their children to recover, and, the nights of lying with their child while they're telling what happened. It's not a question of direct questioning. You're getting up in the night to a screaming child having a nightmare, being violently ill, telling you things. And people call that interfering with the judicial process. That kind of thing. So kids hiding under beds, frightened so that Peter couldn't find them, that kind of thing. Families lived with that, and nothing about this decision changes any of that today for families.
So there's a lot in this, and I want to start with some of the things that you've said. So you accept the findings of the court that it was a flawed investigation and a flawed trial process. But I want to be clear, you still believe that children were abused here?
Absolutely. Nothing about that changes. The criticism of the trial process in the judgment, I've read the condensed version. I'll pay some attention. I have legal training, so I'm very interested in quite a few aspects of this. It was into the expert witnesses. That's not the children, and that's not the children's life and experience. It was into those threshold legal, safe judicial processes. With the benefit of hindsight, I myself am actually very, I won't say encouraged, but I feel spoken to and comforted by the court's final comment. It says, as noted previously, that parents were in an impossible position. Parental love and concern would have made it very difficult to ask their children direct questions. As I say, it wasn't direct questions often. It was just dealing with what any parent would have to deal with. The delays in completing the investigation, associated public controversy exacerbated these factors. It really did. I was there. It was dreadful. We were told have to be absolutely keep a lid on everything with the media. So the media made friends, and we couldn't. And
one of the main issues,
families just dealt with their family situation.
One of the main issues identified here was the potential contamination of the children's evidence, including from parents' questioning. With hindsight, is it possible that families, including your own families, went about this in the wrong way? Not intentionally, but they made mistakes with the way they dealt with this information and their kids.
Look, there was 50 kids interviewed. Of course there'll be people who went about it. What is the right way, Lisa, when your child's crying and vomiting and telling you things? You know, like parents should ask themselves, if you've got a young child, ask yourself this. You know, your child makes a disclosure to you, something about they're frightened of a penis, frightened of that. And that's alarming, and then you hear it again. What do? Okay, well, maybe you take it to the employer, maybe you just ask for some help, maybe ask for some guidance. Then you're recommended, okay, you better do this, you better do that. What are you going to do? You know, like, these are just human beings reacting normally. What is the right and wrong way? Of course, people could have been more perfect in that group. Maybe 99% were perfect and one wasn't, and that led to the unsafe. I don't know. But the fact is, it was a lot of children.
So if you believe that these children were abused?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
So who is the abuser?
Well, I believe that the courts got it wrong in terms of quashing the convictions today, but I understand the process of the high thresholds and the hurdles, and I might understand that a bit better than a lot of victims' families because of my legal training. But, yeah, I can see the complexity of it. I'm prepared to accept that myself. I'm not saying everyone is.
So you believe while the process was flawed, the outcome was
safe.
Right? The convictions were right?
Yes, I believe the convictions were right. I'm prepared to accept, as the court says, with hindsight, the thresholds were so high that they weren't met.
Have you considered the fact that someone else could have abused these children? And if not Peter Ellis, who?
Yeah, I really don't want to go down there with that. You'll be aware of how the case was began and what happened at depositions. Charges were laid, charges were dropped. I really don't want to go down that route. This is just about the court's decision today. As I say, it's a court decision. It doesn't change anything about people's reality. We're all getting on. People call it survival for a good reason. People are strong survivors. Not going to be defined by today or this decision, their personal experience.
And that is the aunt of one of the first complainants in the Peter Ellis sex abuse case. And a lot of you are getting in touch about this decision today by the Supreme Court. Gary says, I am concerned about the lack of support for people who have been falsely accused of crime and criminal activity. Another saying it's heartwarming to hear Peter Ellis's convictions quashed. I was friendly with one of his creche colleagues, another listener says, adamant he was innocent. Peter Ellis's imprisonment was a travesty. All it needs is a suggestion of sexual impropriety, particularly involving children. And for many people, all rational thought flies out the window, believes this person. Lois has got in touch to say he couldn't be more pleased that the appalling conviction of Peter Ellis has been overturned. And this one too, as a former lawyer from another jurisdiction, I have to say there are too many times that the process fails defendants in Aotearoa. Do keep your feedback coming 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. It is 19 minutes to 6 and we are with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, a lot of you are getting in touch about the Peter Ellis case and the Supreme Court judgment today, quashing all his convictions, his sex abuse convictions. Let us know your thoughts. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz, and we'll have more on this case later on in the program. Right now, Evie, though, is here with the headlines. Ko Evie anō tēnei.
Kia ora, Lisa. Peter Ellis's lawyer, Nigel Hampton KC, says today's Supreme Court decision to quash Mr Ellis's 1993 convictions for child sex offences is bittersweet for Ellis's family. He told Checkpoint great care must be taken by prosecutions and courts in allowing expert evidence, particularly in jury trials. A long-time preschool teacher says men in the industry have for many years endured extra scrutiny as a result of the Peter Ellis case. New documents released by Inland Revenue reveal almost $14 million in taxpayer money has been given to New Zealanders who were potentially ineligible for the cost of living payment. A major drinks bottler says it's on the verge of running out of carbon dioxide, which would shut down production. The drinks and food industry has been scrambling for weeks now to find enough of the crucial gas used in chilling and fizzy drinks. More than 1,000 paddlers are gathered at Waitangi for the National Wakaama Long Distance Champs, which has a record number of competitors this year. The defending 6-kilometre men's champion, Tupuria King, says he's not taking the competition lightly. He's been training up to 3 times a day, 6 days a week. And a missing tramper in Wellington has been rescued after making a help sign out of toilet paper. Search and rescue found the 55-year-old tramper in Taradua Forest Park today. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, looking pretty good across the country. If you're sitting in weirdly slow traffic, we haven't heard about it yet. That's it for headlines and traffic. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Kia ora rā, Evie. A migrant worker exploited by his former boss for more than 8 years has finally been awarded almost $100,000. Devinder Man owned multiple pizza stores in Auckland and forced his staff to work long hours of overtime without compensation. He's now been ordered by the Employment Relations Authority to pay up. Tom Taylor reports.
Deepak Diman arrived in New Zealand from India in 2012 on a student work visa. He was 17 years old and unaware of New Zealand's labour laws, and after trying to secure employment at multiple establishments, he finally accepted a job at a pizza store where his friend already worked. The job was to become a living hell for the next 8 years.
I did cry a lot of times. You can understand why a man will be crying for no reason. There should be any reason. Too much pressure. I was doing so much for them, but end of the day, I was getting just this kind of stress.
8 years later, the Employment Relations Authority has ordered that Mr. Deeman's former boss, Devinder Man, pay almost $70,000 in wage arrears and $28,000 in arrears of holiday pay, plus interest on both amounts. It was a hard-fought battle, but one migrant rights advocate, Sunny Segal, says is far from over.
The migrant has actually got justice in relation to this case. But again, the sad news is there are many out there who has worked for this employer since 2011 under the same situation, who has been exploited by this employer, and no other migrant should be going under the same hardship as my client has gone through.
In 2012, New Zealand's minimum wage was $13.50. Mr. Deeman receives the equivalent of $8 an hour, working 20 hours a week and only getting paid for 10. And for his first week of on-the-job training, he wasn't paid a cent.
I wasn't sure because I was new and nobody told me this is paid training, they have to pay, but nobody guided me or anything because I don't have any friends because I was new.
In 2014, Mr. Deeman was issued a 2-year work visa attached to Man's company, Nanak, at a pizza store in Flatbush, where he was to be an assistant manager. The contract, which Mr. Deeman says he never received or even signed, required him to work 35 to 40 hours a week for a salary of $29,000. But the actual hours he worked were far longer than those stipulated.
I got a contract of 35 hours and he told me you have to work 55 hours and then you will only get paid for 35 hours. And other things, you can't take any sick leave. If you are sick, just stay in the shop. You can't go home or you can't take any public holiday. If you want a holiday within the week, then you have to come on your day off. So there's only one day off. There's no annual leave. So after 2 years, he was only giving just 3 weeks off.
Mr. Deeman's annual leave was extremely limited while working for Man. In 2018, he took just his second period of leave, returning to India for his own wedding, which had been arranged by his parents. But even in granting the leave Mr. Deeman was owed, Man became threatening.
He told me, okay, yeah, that's fine, you can go, but make sure you come. You don't take more days. Okay, you want 1 more week, then you don't have to come back, you have to just stay there.
The couple spending so little time together meant Mr. Deeman's wife had a long struggle ahead in obtaining a visa. She only joined Mr. Deeman in New Zealand earlier this year after 4 years of marriage. In 2016, Mr. Deeman was granted a 3 years essential work visa as a store manager for the pizza store in Flatbush. He says he continued to work between 50 to 57 hours a week and continued to be paid for less.
He never paid anyone to annual leave or sick leave or any public holiday. He never paid to anyone.
In 2020, after 8 years of being underpaid and exploited, Mr. Deeman had finally had enough and resigned. He took his case to migrant rights advocate Sunny Segal, who fought on his behalf. At this point, he says Devinder Mann approached Mr. Deeman's brother, threatening his family with repercussions.
He starts threatening, like, I will do this, I know some police officer in India and they will went to your house, they will went to your in-laws house and they will arrest your father, mother.
When the case was picked up by the Employment Relations Authority, Devinder Mann denied involvement in the breaches of minimum entitlements, but conceded that some payments in respect of public holidays were owed. At an investigation meeting in July, Mann did not provide a written statement or any evidence. When the authority told Mann he would be under oath, he abruptly left, saying that the whole process was a setup. When contacted by RNZ, Mann said he would be laying corruption charges against the advocates backing Mr. Deeman. But he wouldn't respond to any questions about underpaying his staff. Why are you denying involvement in the alleged breaches of the minimum entitlements? Mr. Deeman is now working as a pizza store manager under a different employer in Huntly, and although he is yet to receive the money owed to him, he says he is just happy that justice will be served.
And that was Tom Taylor reporting. Overseas now, it was a massacre that has shocked a nation and the world. Thailand's king is expected to visit the town in northern Thailand, where at least 38 people, mostly children, were killed by an attacker at a nursery school. The man responsible was a former police officer who was undergoing trial on drug charges. He carried out the attack with a gun and a knife and killed children and teachers before shooting himself. The BBC's Jonathan Head is at the daycare centre.
This is a community now consumed by grief and shock that children so young had been deliberately killed by a fellow parent. The children were taking a midday nap inside the nursery when the attacker turned up to collect his son, who wasn't there, and then opened fire.
It all went down really fast. He was slashing the knife. He didn't use the gun. He kept slashing in there. It's all by a knife.
He was in the middle of reloading the gun. I held my hands up and begged for mercy. I didn't know what to do.
Survivors were taken to the nearest hospital, but there weren't many. The authorities say the attacker was a former police officer who'd been arrested and was being tried on drug charges. They removed the last of the victims from this daycare centre a few hours ago, and there's little left now to indicate the horrific events that took place here. But there is stunned disbelief, not just in this village, but across Thailand, that however troubled his life may have been, this former police officer could have carried out such a cruel and desperate act. A few distraught family members stayed close by, hoping for answers, but there were none. Nanti Chapancham is lucky to have survived. She's a teacher at the centre. She described hearing the first shots as she was preparing lunch. She recognised the gunman as a parent, she said, but we never thought he would attack the children. This country is accustomed to gun crime, but nothing on this scale involving so many children. Well, over the next 24 hours, we expect the families of those who died in this centre to come back here and start trying to process it, to ask questions. We're also expecting a visit by Thailand's king. That's a rarity, but it gives you a sense of just what an impact this has had on this country. And I think they will be combing through the life of this man who carried out this extraordinary and shocking crime to see whether they can find an explanation for what he did. There will, of course, be some talk about access to guns, but he had only one gun that he had legally, and it looks like mostly here he used the knife. I don't think there are explanations that people can find. He was clearly a very troubled man, but beyond that, this was something almost inexplicable, and I think it's going to leave a lot of scars in this community.
Jonathan Head reporting there from Thailand. Another 7 cases of hepatitis A have cropped up in the community, 1 linked to the consumption of frozen berries and 6 under investigation. Foodstuffs has recalled and pulled various Pam's frozen berry products over the suspected link. Now, a man who fell victim to the bad berries has described how the liver infection hit him pretty hard. Katie Todd has the story.
From a health kick involving 2 berry smoothies a day to an overnight stint in hospital, this Christchurch man is among at least 13 New Zealanders who've now fallen victim to hepatitis A in an outbreak that prompted 4 varieties of Pam's frozen berries to be plucked from freezers nationwide. He initially brushed off the symptoms as a bad hangover, but it stuck around, so he headed to the doctor for a blood test.
My liver levels, normally they should be around 40 enzymes or something, apparently. And mine were like 2,400, so they were very, very high. And they asked, could you please get into hospital now?
The symptoms of hepatitis A include fever, diarrhoea and nausea. 2 weeks on from his hospital stay, the man says he's still dealing with fatigue and jaundice, or yellowing of the skin and eyes.
Everyone's sort of taking the joke out. I look like I'm part of The Simpsons.
There's no knowing for certain that frozen berries caused his woes. The open packet in his freezer was tested but returned negative results. However, hepatitis A has the potential to incubate for up to 50 days, so berries he ate a long time ago could be to blame. And New Zealand Food Safety says so far 11 of the country's cases have been linked by genomic sequencing, meaning they were all likely exposed to the same source. Auckland-based paediatrician and hepatitis expert Helen Evans says hepatitis A outbreaks occur in Aotearoa every so often. It can spread from person to person, although that can be thwarted with good hand hygiene.
Of course, within a household, people will often be touching the same surfaces, they'll often be eating the same food. So you can sometimes see hepatitis A within family members, but it's not infectious in the same way as something like COVID would be through, respiratory drops.
Frozen berries were also the culprit when 4 people were diagnosed in 2015. For each person, Helen Evans says symptoms can range from very mild to severe. She says parents should be mindful of their children's health.
Often children are more likely to go to hospital because they don't understand the need to keep up with hydration when they're unwell. And little children in particular can often become dehydrated quite quickly. So that's often a reason why younger children might appear to be more severely affected.
The Christchurch man is taking his experience in his stride, saying it's an eye-opener to keep watch for any health warnings. It hasn't been enough to deter him from berries altogether.
Oh, well, apparently you're immune now, so once I'm back healthy, I'll be eating them again. Yeah, they're not, apparently once you have it now, you're sort of immune, so I don't see a point of hiding away from it, because I like them, so...
New Zealand Food Safety is asking people to keep taking extra precautions with frozen berries. It says heat treating them will kill the virus.
And it's 4 minutes to 6. Kia amo tunu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Who ate all the pies? Well, it turns out one Women's Rugby World Cup team has given it their best shot. On the eve of the tournament's kick-off, the USA team are the talk of the Northland town of Tutukaka after spending over $1,000 on pies for dinner at a local cafe. Leonard Powell has the story.
Everyone's coming in today going, oh, you guys are so great, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it's been pretty awesome.
That's Julie Sands, who has run the Salt Air Cafe in the Whangarei district of Ngunguru with her husband for 17 years. There's a buzz around town following news the USA women's rugby squad demolished 90 pies for dinner on Wednesday night. Julie tells me how the USA pie takeover went down.
Okay, well, how it came to be is they were over here in June, and they had been into our cafe and they just fell in love with our pies. So one of the girls, Anne-Marie, wanted to pretty much take over the cafe, but they all wanted to eat pies, and they were going to have a pie contest to see which was the nicest pie, pretty much.
Julie got to work with her staff to provide 9 different pies, along with salad and chips for the group of 46. On the pie menu were mince and cheese, mince bacon and mushroom, steak and cheese, pepper steak and mushroom, seafood, and butter chicken pies. Julie says it was a hoot, and there were 3 clear pie favourites amongst the tourists.
It was absolutely amazing. We all had a ball. Good for them, good for us, good for our community. And the end result was the best pies were steak and cheese, seafood, and butter chicken.
Salt Air Cafe are no strangers to selling large numbers of their in-demand $7 pies. Pies are sold 7 days a week from 6 in the morning to 8 at night, and in the peak of summer sell over 200 daily. Based in Northland for the first part of the tournament, USA captain Kate Zachary says it's important to involve themselves in local communities.
Whenever we travel, whether we were just in the UK last month or anywhere we go, we try to do something in the community because that's what rugby's about. And it's also getting to know the people around us who are making their homes our home. So we definitely hope to do that more often and get down to the pie shop in some free time and maybe get around to some other shops and just share our love for what they're offering for us here.
Hooker Jojo Kiltinsky was inspired by the pastry delights and says she wouldn't rule out taking the pie business back to the States and even potentially adding some flavours of her own.
Maybe out of a food truck or something, or have to be a different twist depending on where it's at, but I just in California. Maybe do a little twist on a sweet pie as well and also have the meat pies.
Julie says it's common for large groups to come into her store, but it's clear the USA women's rugby team has a new fan.
These girls made it a really fun night and they're amazing, these girls.
Julie says she's hoping to go and see USA take on Italy in Whangarei on Sunday, and swapping pies for tickets wasn't out of the question. The last question I had for Julie was, what was the secret to making a good pie?
No, you know what the secret is, Leonard? Is you make them with love.
I'm really worried now. If they're the winners, they've had an unfair advantage eating all those pies, Evie. We should have withheld the pies.
Well deserved.
Good on them. Hey, a lot of you getting in touch about the Peter Ellis case. This person says they're delighted that the convictions have been cleared, but the New Zealand justice system should hang its head in shame. So many years of ostrich-like behaviour and stonewalling from bottom to top in the face of manifest failures, this person says. Another person says they had a male colleague who was a preschool teacher. He quit his job as a result of the Ellis case.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening. Kia ora tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. Mark Ellis says the decision to overturn the conviction against his brother Peter has been a long time coming. The Supreme Court today quashed Mr Ellis's 1993 convictions for child sex offences, finding a significant miscarriage of justice occurred. Peter Ellis died in 2019, but the court allowed the appeal to go ahead because of significant public interest. His brother held back tears outside the court.
Wish my brother was here because it was really what he deserved. It's not for us to hear so much. Him and Mum, who were the staunch party in the whole thing and always stood strong.
Mark Ellis and sister Tania say the decision has restored their brother's mana. Nigel Hampton KC, the lawyer who represented Peter Ellis in his first trial, told Checkpoint that he hopes what happened to Mr Ellis will never happen again.
One of the good things to come out of Peter's case, not directly, but the creation for the last 2 and a bit years of a criminal cases review commission, which looks at miscarriages of justice and would, if it had been in existence, would have corrected it long before we had spent 30 years waiting for it to happen.
Nigel Hampton says Mr Ellis remained composed until his death, knowing he would eventually be exonerated. The Green Party says the new child poverty report is nothing to celebrate. The Ministry of Social Development report has found child poverty is declining, with 145,000 fewer children in hardship in 2021 than during the global financial crisis. The government says the report's proof it's lifting children out of poverty. But Green Party child poverty reduction spokesperson Jan Logie says those on the lowest incomes need more support.
There are children who need more support than others. There are parents who are actually their health or their mental health will be negatively impacted by parenting and working longer hours. And we need them to make those assessments rather than blunt government policies or narratives.
Jan Logie says working for families needs to be overhauled. A major drinks bottler says it's on the verge of running out of carbon dioxide, which would shut down production. The drinks and food industry has been scrambling for weeks to find enough of the crucial gas used in chilling and fizzy drinks. The bottler, speaking on condition of anonymity, says it looks like it will run out on Sunday. It says it might just get some more on Monday, but the market is brutal. Craft brewers warned this week beer supplies might run short this summer for lack of the gas. Food producers warned in June the shortage is hurting production. Todd Energy says its production of CO2 should resume in full this week. However, it only supplies 40% of demand. A missing tramper in Wellington has been rescued after making a help sign out of toilet paper. He went missing after leaving for a 5-day tramp on the 28th of September. Felix Walton has more.
Search and rescue located the 55-year-old tramper in Tararua Forest Park today. Concerned family notified police after not hearing from him for several days. He was trapped in a hut by bad weather after only completing a short portion of his route. Without a rescue beacon, the man tried to spell out help with toilet paper, but ran out before he could finish. A rescue helicopter spotted the unfinished signal and reunited the tramper with his friends and family.
Almost $14 million in taxpayer money has been given to New Zealanders who were potentially ineligible for the cost of living payment. The number is found in new documents released by Inland Revenue into the $350 temporary payment announced in the budget. The new papers show roughly 77,000 people received at least one instalment despite potentially living overseas. Another 12,000 ineligible recipients got the support due to other errors. 85 of them were dead. Nationals Deputy Nicola Willis says it's a shambles.
The real shocker here is that the government was in such a hurry to rush money out the door that it paid no attention to the details.
About 1.3 million eligible people have received the payment in full. Corrections is set to move 75 prisoners into Rimutaka prison to relieve pressure elsewhere. It's shifting them around amid severe staffing shortages. The agency says the inmates will be shifted to the Upper Hutt prison from its Mount Eden Corrections Facility and Spring Hill in Waikato over coming weeks. It says it will open up double-bunked cells for them. Corrections says Rimutaka has 615 inmates now, well below its 2018 peak of 1,100. It says shifting inmates will let it maintain or increase minimum entitlements, such as letting prisoners out of their cells more. And US President Joe Biden is to pardon all Americans convicted of marijuana possession under federal laws and has urged state governors to follow suit. Mr. Biden noted that non-white people have been disproportionately affected by marijuana convictions. The BBC's Peter Bowes reports.
This will affect about 6,500 people who have a conviction for simple possession of marijuana as it relates to the federal laws, very distinct from local laws, from state convictions, which is quite separate and may well be addressed in the future. And the president saying that he is doing this because, to use his words, the current situation has upended too many lives. And what he's referring to are the difficulties faced by people with these convictions of getting on with their lives, of getting a job, of getting access to housing or education, how it affects them and their close families.
That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, curator Julia Waite from Auckland Art Gallery on the upcoming exhibition Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera, Art and Life in Modern Mexico, which will showcase more than 150 artworks by the groundbreaking Mexican artists and their contemporaries. Julia's spent a year working on the show, which opens next week. And Dan Slevin joins us to share his movie selections to make choosing your weekend watching a bit easier. On Nights with Karen Hay after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And we're on air on rnz.co.nz and on your mobile. You're back with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. Northland and Auckland, partly cloudy, a few showers possible in the east later tomorrow. From Waikato to Kapiti Coast, including Coromandel, the Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, fine. Morning frosts tomorrow, some showers possible about the ranges tomorrow afternoon. From Gisborne to Wairarapa and also for Wellington, partly cloudy, showers clearing this evening or overnight, becoming fine early tomorrow. Bulla, Nelson and Marlborough, mainly fine, but the chance of a shower about the ranges this afternoon. Areas of cloud in the north tomorrow morning, then in Bulla later. Westland and Fiordland, fine today, showers developing tomorrow. Canterbury, Otago and Southland. Fine, apart from showers about Banks Peninsula until this evening. Morning frosts tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, Rekohu, cloudy periods. A few showers clearing this evening. It's 7 minutes past 6. Our next news headlines are at 6:30.
Nā mihi iwi, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A substantial miscarriage of justice almost 30 years after he was sent to prison. Peter Ellis's child sex abuse convictions were today quashed by the Supreme Court. He served 7 years in prison after being convicted in 1993 of 16 charges of sexually offending against 7 children at the Christchurch creche where he worked. Stephen Ferguson was the chaplain at Paparua prison where he first met Peter Ellis in maximum security. He and his wife Pamela later became friends with him and were with him in the days leading up to his death from cancer in 2019. Stephen told me today's decision came with mixed emotions.
Peter was always concerned with the children that were involved. And from the time of meeting him in Maxi and Paparua prison to his dying day, he always carried that care for what happened for the children in the process.
So Stephen, you always believed, Stephen, that he was innocent?
As I got to know Peter and followed through things, I could see that there was an injustice. You can't just follow things through and see how the evidence was contaminated and continuing things that without coming to the conclusion like the judges did today regarding 23G.
So you're talking about expert witnesses overstepping the mark and also contamination of the children's evidence there.
Absolutely.
So
and there's a lot more.
So how do you think
for another day?
How do you think Peter would have reacted to today's decision?
Oh, there would have been a great sense of relief. There would have been a great sense of joy. But also, you know, when you've carried a conviction for being the lowest of the low, and that just stays with you too. It just doesn't go away because the court has made the right decision. And so there's that tension, that bittersweetness. But he would have been so glad to have his name cleared. And the other person would have been Peter's mother. Leslie Ellis was a sterling, strong, great woman. And how she supported Peter and stood by Peter and worked a number of jobs in her support. I just can't speak highly enough of Peter's mother. What a great woman.
How do you feel about the fact that neither of them are here to witness this moment?
Well, you can't really put it into words. We've had this afternoon with me, we've had, you know, celebration and joy, but the tinge of sadness is there, and that's life, and that's the reality of what happens when injustice happens. It can't be undone. But his name is cleared, and for that we're grateful.
So the Supreme Court has quashed his conviction on the basis of the expert witness and also concerns about contamination of the children's evidence. But do you believe something bad did happen to those children?
No, I do not.
You think nothing happened to them?
No, I do not. If Peter Ellis was never, ever responsible for physically or verbally or emotionally abusing any child in his care. That came from knowing Peter over the years. That's laying aside the legal and different things. But if you knew Peter Ellis and his integrity in this area, that's a solid conclusion that stands.
Could someone else be responsible? Could something have happened to them, or do you believe that nothing happened to them?
I can't comment on that. Who knows?
Stephen,
but I know Peter Ellison wasn't the person.
I understand I understand that your wife, Pam, had a special friendship with Peter, yes?
Yes, that's right. I mean, we were with Peter, as with the family was, over his last days and months of his life. And Peter could give me cheek and be a bit grumpy with me, but Pam was could do no wrong, and she was a great support to Peter.
Would Pam like to say anything, do you think, Stephen?
No, it's all a bit raw and special for her, but yeah.
An overwhelming day, yeah?
Yeah.
Did Peter talk about what he would want to happen if his convictions were quashed, whether he wanted any other action taken?
We didn't focus on that, and that's really a conversation for another day. There was things we did discuss, but it's not a conversation for today.
Is there anything else that you would like to tell us, Stephen?
Well, it's just a great day to have his name cleared, and a big thanks has got to go to a lot of people. There's Winston Whalens and all the crew, and we think of the ladies in Christchurch, but we think of Linley Hood. If it wasn't for Linley Sterling's 7-year work on a city possessed, who knows? And of course, a great big thanks to Rob Harrison and his team. Just really forever grateful.
Stephen, do you think many people stood by Peter in these difficult times?
There was people, but the public, as time went on, the public could see, and Peter garnered a large body of support latterly in New Zealand. And Peter lived out at Leesfield there, and people in North Canterbury. He moved about, and people accepted him because people knew that there was a problem with Peter's decision.
And that was former prison chaplain and friend of Peter Ellis, Stephen Ferguson. To overseas news now, and Ukraine may be advancing in the war against Russia, but overnight came a reminder of the Russian army's power. At least 5 people have been killed in a series of rocket attacks on the southern city of Zaporizhia. The attacks hit residential buildings before dawn and then again hours later. The BBC's Paul Adams reports.
This is the main avenue running right through the middle of Zaporizhia, and in front of me is an old apartment block where a gaping hole has been blown in the middle of it. There's a huge pile of rubble, there's grey, black smoke drifting up out of the wreckage into the morning sky. Across the street, windows have been blown out in shops. So powerful was this explosion that the fence in the middle of the road was blown out. There are firemen crawling around the wreckage, presumably looking for survivors. We think that maybe some have already been pulled out. It's hard to see how. This happened about an hour or so before dawn. We heard multiple explosions. Olha lives nearby. She says her daughter was so frightened she hid in a corner and refused to come out.
I have no words. It really hurts. And it's going to hurt even when I'm gone. I will never forgive Russia for this. I won't. We shouldn't forgive Russia for killing our children. We should take revenge and take it to the end.
Alla is another neighbour. She has relatives who live in the building. She doesn't think they're alive.
Why are they doing this to us? What are they trying to prove? Killing old people? Why? For what?
Explosions in Zaporizhia are not uncommon, but wreckage like this definitely is. Five hours later, more explosions and more smoke rising in the distance. So we've come now to the scene of one of the later explosions. that occurred here mid-morning. We're at a car wash and garage, and there's a pretty huge crater here. I'd say it's 10 feet deep, maybe 20 foot across, and a lot of damage. The garage itself has had its roof ripped off, all the metal cladding stripped from the wall. There's no word of casualties here, but this was part of the second volley of missiles to hit Zaporizhzhia in the space of just a few hours.
And that was the BBC's Paul Adams reporting. It is 18 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. President Biden, just weeks before the congressional midterm elections, has pardoned people convicted of marijuana possession under federal law. It clears the convictions of about 6,500 people who've been charged over the past 30 years. Mr Biden is asking states to follow his lead for people convicted on state charges of similar possession. CNN's Caitlin Collins says the pardon is a big step for the government.
It is something that President Biden had promised on the campaign trail, and some advocates had asked why it had not happened yet, almost 2 years into his administration. But today he delivered on that promise by moving to pardon thousands of Americans who have been convicted under federal law of possession of marijuana. The White House putting the estimate at the people who will be affected by this decision by President Biden at about 6,500 people, in addition to the thousands who were prosecuted under law in the District of Columbia as well. And so with this move, President Biden is also urging governors to follow his lead for people who are convicted under state offenses, under state law, saying that they should also take a similar step to what he's taking by pardoning these thousands of people, because of course there's more than a dozen states where marijuana is no longer illegal. And so you're right, this isn't the full decriminalization that some people on both sides of the political aisle have called for, but it is a pretty big step for this White House. And in addition to President Biden pardoning these thousands of people and calling on states to follow his lead, he is also asking the Department of Health and Human Services and the Attorney General to conduct a review into how marijuana is classified, because right now it's a Schedule I drug. That means that they believe it's high potential for abuse. They don't believe it has any medical purposes. Even fentanyl is not considered a Schedule I drug, and obviously that has caused so many issues and deaths in teenagers and young people, and it has become such a crisis in this country. And so he is also calling for a review into that as well, in addition to this major move that the White House announced this afternoon.
CNN's Caitlin Collins. Prince Harry, Elton John and Elizabeth Hurley have joined forces to sue a major media company they say bugged cars and illegally procured sensitive medical and financial records. They've launched legal action against Associated Newspapers, publishers of the Daily Mail, the Mail on Sunday and the Mail Online for alleged gross breaches of privacy. The BBC's Tom Simmons has the story.
They are veterans of the fight against media intrusion. Now Prince Harry, Elton John and his partner David Furnish, Liz Hurley and Sadie Frost have combined forces to take on the Mail, along with, and this was a surprise, Baroness Doreen Lawrence. She's had a warm relationship with the Daily Mail. Two of her son Stephen's killers were jailed in 2012. For more than a decade, the Mail helped keep the case in the headlines. But this is what lawyers for her and the others now say Associated Newspaper journalists have been involved with. Bugging cars and homes, listening to private telephone calls, paying police officials for sensitive information, and obtaining illicitly medical and financial records. More serious allegations even than phone hacking, according to a lawyer who's been involved in legal action against Associated Newspapers.
They are highly intrusive. They are means of delving into the private lives of people, and private lives which are protected by statute under the Human Rights Act and by convention, by the European Convention on Human Rights. So it is a gross invasion of privacy if these things occurred, and it would be absolutely right and proper if they did occur that Associated Newspapers and hopefully some of their senior figures are held to account.
Phone hacking was not practiced by the Mail on Sunday or the Daily Mail.
That was the former Mail editor in 2012. Today's statement from Associated Newspapers: we utterly and unambiguously refute these preposterous smears, which appear to be nothing more than a pre-planned and orchestrated attempt to drag the Mail titles into the phone hacking scandal, concerning articles up to 30 years old. Baroness Lawrence had been persuaded to endorse lies, the company said. It's all heading for court, and it's likely to take years to resolve. If the Mail's owners were to lose, well, the stakes are enormous.
Seaweed could be the country's new big industry. While some companies harvest seaweed in New Zealand, there are no large-scale commercial farms or hatcheries. Samantha G went along to the Seaweed Summit in Nelson.
Fisherman Bren Smith became an ocean farmer when the search for sustainability led him to oysters, mussels and then seaweed. He now farms shellfish and seaweed in Long Island Sound off the coast of New York.
The power of seaweed and seaweed farming is, one, it's regenerative, so we're sequestering carbon, nitrogen, rebuilding reefs. It's zero input, so no fresh water, no fertilizer, no feed, makes it the most sustainable food on the planet. And like anybody who's growing food that doesn't require inputs, it's going to make it really affordable in this era of climate change.
He's speaking in Nelson, where he says those farming shellfish are already well poised to use their skills to farm seaweed.
So that whole supply chain is here already, and I wouldn't be surprised if New Zealand leaps ahead of the US because of the planning and also the existing infrastructure and skills.
It could soon be a reality in the Bay of Plenty, where Te Whānau Apanui have plans to establish a commercial seaweed farm off the coast of Te Kaha. Hayden Reid of Te Whānau Apanui says the iwi has signed a partnership deal with one of the largest seaweed producers in North America that has farms in Mexico and Alaska.
The science and the knowledge of the industry is growing in New Zealand, so it makes good sense to step into that space that they're already very aware of. They've been exporting crayfish for 30, 35 years. They've had quota for a number of years, almost as long as that, I think, as well. So this is just a natural extension of what they've been doing, and it's a new industry globally, so they're picking up the ball and running with it.
Cawthron Institute marine scientist Rob Major says there are a number of potential uses for commercially grown seaweed.
New Zealand's very lucky. We've got 1,000 plus species of seaweed here in New Zealand. Many of them are native to New Zealand. We have really good water for growing seaweed, and based on that diversity, there is lots of opportunities for New Zealand seaweed species to be used and have applications that current seaweed species overseas don't really have.
Karingo, a native seaweed that has been eaten for generations by Maori, is very high in protein.
We've got people that are looking at feeding seaweed to cattle to reduce methane emissions. We've got people that are using it for fertiliser. There's the food products. There's also the beauty products. And there's so much good stuff in seaweed. You can extract one thing and then it becomes a waste stream. So you can take multiple things for different companies out of that waste stream.
One of the project's main recommendations has already been met with the launch of a new sector voice, the Aotearoa New Zealand Seaweed Association. It's focused on building a sustainable, high-value seaweed industry for the future.
And finally tonight, finding a Santa for a photo at a shopping mall might be a bit tougher this year, with a recruitment company blaming the pandemic for a Santa shortage. Our reporter Finn Blackwell has the story.
It's only October and preparations are already being made for the festive season. There's just one issue, a shortage of Santa Clauses at the country's shopping centres. Seen to Believe is the Australian company helping recruit this year's Kris Kringles. New Zealand account manager Jim Bennett is blaming the pandemic.
After COVID, many of the existing Santas have decided to hang up their boots, and so we're looking for the next generation of Santas to come on board.
These Aucklanders are hoping he finds them.
Well, that's very sad. I hadn't heard that myself.
Kind of smashes the illusion for kids, I would imagine. There's no Santas around.
Kids need their presents and they need their excitement leading up to Christmas, so we want to see some Santas out there, I think.
Jim Bennett says they've set up a Santa school for those ready to don the iconic red suit.
So we have experienced Santas that do the training, so Santa's helpers, and so you get a comprehensive training session which gives you all the things that you need, from how you put on your suit, we give you a belly, we give you a bed if you need it, through to how to interact with the kids and the best way to be Santa.
Jim Bennett says there are training sessions in Auckland, Hamilton, Tauranga, Palmerston North and Christchurch. One person, however, who knows exactly what the job needs is 72-year-old Dave Doherty. Dave's been a mall Santa at Auckland's Botany Town Centre for the past 8 years and says it's the best job in the world.
The main part of the job is being there for children, for all, Santa's for everybody, not just kids. And the reward you get from seeing the faces, it's hard to explain, because unless you do it, you can't get that feeling.
His suit, hat and boots, ready at a moment's notice.
And it's such a rewarding job. And I wish more people would would take it on.
Though the hours can be long and the suit incredibly hot in the summer, Dave says he wouldn't have it any other way.
The likes of me, I've got a passion for the job. The money is a bonus as far as I'm concerned. You know, I don't do it for the money.
He has a clear message for those considering taking up the mantle.
Try it. You'll enjoy it. The satisfaction that you get from seeing children smile, walk away happy, seeing children jumping up and down excited, waiting to see Santa, and even the parents.
Dave says it's a good opportunity to spread some Christmas cheer.
Ho, ho, ho!
Well, some more of your thoughts before we head off on this day where the Supreme Court quashed the sex abuse convictions of Peter Ellis. This listener says, my friend was at the creche with Peter Ellis and was also babysat by him after hours. She believes he was innocent. Another person says, way back in 93, as a medical practitioner, I was already aware that the method of questioning used with children was proven to produce false memories, and that's to the standards required of the peer-reviewed medicine and science, they say. I've always questioned the findings of Peter Ellis's original trial because of the way the memories of the events were obtained from the children. My medical training suggests they could easily be false memories. Whether guilty or not, at least the way his case was handled has been shown to be a miscarriage of justice. Yeah, and the main planks of that decision relate to an expert witness that was used and not enough warning given to the jury about potential contamination of the children's evidence, with that contamination in some cases coming from parents. Another person raises an interesting question here. Does this mean the recipients of tens of thousands of ACC compensation dollars will now in good faith pay this money back? That is all we've got time for today. The Late News team's going to keep you updated throughout the night. And just remember, if you missed anything on the program or you want to listen back to anything, you can always find us on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. Have a fantastic weekend. Thank you very much for your company. See you Monday.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. Mark Ellis says the decision to overturn the conviction against his brother Peter has been a long time coming. The Supreme Court today quashed Peter Ellis's 1993 convictions for child sex offences. Almost $14 million in taxpayer money has been given to New Zealanders who were potentially ineligible for the cost of living payment. And a major drinks bottler says it is on the verge of running out of carbon dioxide, which should shut down production. It says the market for the gas is brutal. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
This week on Music 101, Troy Kingi introduces us to his new 80s album. We talk America with Martin Phillips of The Chills. Chat with whistler Molly Lewis. And outgoing Auckland Mayor Phil Goff is our guest on the mixtape, picking his favourite tunes. Music 101 this Saturday with me, Charlotte Ryan, from 1 p.m. here on RNZ National.
Coming up after 7, you're with Karen Hay on Nights. Right now, welcome to Trending Now. Tonight, the detail with Alexia Russell and what do we do about cleaning up the bombs left behind in the Pacific after World War II.
3 times a day, every weekday, this happens on RNZ.
How's the New Zealand dollar looking?
One moment, I appear to have the wrong file there. Give me a minute and I'll find the right one. Let's see. Let's try this.
Over the past few weeks, we've been notified about the recipients of the Nobel Prizes, the peak of any academic's career.
I got called this morning at 2:50 a.m.
Congratulations for receiving the Nobel Prize in Chemistry.
It's extraordinary. I mean, it's surreal.
So I expected something might happen, but I knew there are other people that are in line to win Nobel Prizes.
But in mid-September, an even more exclusive set of awards were handed out.
the awarding of the Ig Nobel Prizes
for demonstrating that sexual orgasms can be as effective as decongestant medicines at improving nasal breathing.
Other honours include the Peace Prize, which went to a multinational team of 6